Hello, everyone, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio's Badgerpod Nerdcast number 32. How
Band in Calgary! Band!
We are back in the saddle, recovered, and ready for more. I am your host, Brian Martinez, and with us we have lots of guests and stuff. You know.
Yes, hosts.
They're hosts and guests. Well, I mean,
As
yeah,
you know
people. How it is. They know,
Yeah.
You guys know us. We don't need to be organized. All right, so my name's Brian. I have that website with the comic. It's Good Guy or whatever. And I'm going to pass the buck on to Allison.
Okay, my name is Allison Tiemann. I've recently, as you've probably known, been banned for life, or possibly just 10 years from Calgary, or comics expos across Canada. Specifically, I was forced to remove my booth for Xenospora and Honey Badger Brigade, which also had a Gamergate flag in the booth. And yeah, so I write and draw Xenospora, which is a science fiction webcomic. You can find it at xenospora.com. And if you're interested in helping us out with our legal fund, you can find that at feedthebadger.com. And I'll hand it over to Rachel. Rachel. Okay, I'll hand it over to Mike.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mike. I'm some kind of comedy internet prankster. I do things like fly 8,000 miles in total just to get kicked out of a con. It's hilarious. It's a stunt. Do you see?
You madman, you.
I know, right? Whatever will I do next?
What other personal losses will you take?
8,000 miles to get banned from a comic convention.
8,000 miles to drink a bottle of Shiraz with me.
Anything I say will not pass through certain sarcasm filters and will become overloaded. So I'm not going to say anything.
Oh, you said sarcasm. That comes from the Greek words meaning flesh tearing. That means you want to tear people's flesh. I knew it.
Oh, God. It begins.
God? Are you a Christian now, Alison?
With your barbed tongue?
You're going to infiltrate the Christian state.
All right. Okay, so Rachel, tell people who you are if they don't know.
Hi. I'm Rachel of Birds. I do a lot of writing for this show. Also, the gatekeeper of the silly place. Maybe.
I think so.
Yeah.
You can call yourself that.
Yeah. Shh. It's okay. Allison, just accept it. But yeah, I do a blog at naughtynerdist.tumblr.com, and yeah, and I went with all of these interesting characters to Calgary and took pictures of foliage. Yeah, there you go.
So what you're saying is you harassed innocent bushes?
Yes, without their consent.
Your shutter.
With your creeper photography.
Shh.
I bet you got all up close, didn't you?
It's okay. They liked it, I think.
Did you take macros? Oh my God. Unbelievable.
I took all the pictures, Allison. All the pictures of that rock and that tree.
Such a bushogynist.
Okay. Hannah, tell us about yourself.
I am Hannah Wallen, and if sarcasm is a sin, I am in deep shit. I'm also the author of Breaking the Glasses at breakingtheglasses.blogspot.com, where sarcasm is often the rule instead of the exception. So go take a look and see what I mean. And that's it for me, because I don't do long intros.
Okay, well, Anna, take it away.
All right. Yeah, I think sarcasm is how we all deal with pretty much everything, so we're all pretty fucked on that regard. But I'll try to be serious as much as possible, being the gatekeeper of the silly and the naughty place, as I am. I'm a cosplayer and a professional naked girl, and I play lots of video games, and I write things on anti-feminist topics, and I did the Vivian thing, and then I have a YouTube channel, tropes versus men, whatever, and that's what I do.
And you are our resident cosplayer.
Yes.
Which is awesome. But you guys that are gatekeepers, you know that you're triggering me because the word gate is there, and we all know the word gate
Equals hate.
is
Gate is hate
basically
now.
the worst thing you can say. All right, so let's get right into the first, well, our topic for the day. We're going to try and do a little bit of a spin on the usual and talk about what kinds of media, film, television, books, whatever, that we have consumed that we feel does basically female characters and relationships well. We've done a lot where we've looked at how, you know, things are done wrong, or they're just sort of like lame, or, you know, what bothered us about how it's handled. But what are some good examples? So, and I have like some, I think we all have like something that we've looked at and said, oh shit, that looks okay. So, Rachel, you did a little writing on it. Let's do that, and then we'll open up the floor for conversation.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be back, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, you like it too. Okay, how to do it right. As creators and consumers of media, one question arises in our minds. What is the right way to go about the depiction of gender in that media? If we listen to feminists, the answer is to create perfect female characters, women who are strong but without flaws. In trying to create strong female characters, they often end up creating overpowered goddesses with few imperfections. If there is a problem, it's almost never the fault of the female protagonist. Instead, if there's a problem, it's the fault of a man. To write a realistic, relatable female character, she must be fallible. Perhaps her morality isn't clear-cut and she has a few vices. Maybe she is corruptible or naive. Maybe she was once corrupted and now desires redemption. To write a relatable, strong female character is to understand that everyone suffers. To create a strong character, that character must endure hardship. Bravery is not a lack of fear, but feeling that fear and overcoming it within yourself. It is how the character deals with their virtues and vices that inspires admiration in the viewer. So when feminists push forward stories without conflict, stories that give female characters little challenge, where their resolve is unwavering, and they effortlessly beat all obstacles in their way, they fail utterly to create a female character that feels real to the audience. There is a word for a character like this, a character who is practically perfect in every way. Mary Sue. Luckily for us, there is a wealth of great relatable female characters in movies, television, and comics, and video games. They just might not pass the Bechdel test. Discuss.
Well, I mean, I've noticed when I think about how you do that well, a lot of the films are the ones from when I was younger, like the older ones. I mean, like, everyone usually goes right to Ellen Ripley from Alien, which is a really good example, but there has to be more, right? One of the ones that I actually was thinking about was there's a great film called Kingdom of Heaven, which is a Ridley Scott epic about the Crusades. And there is a character that is played by Eva Green, and she's sort of like this noble that's living it up really well. She's like the sister of the king, you know, the leper king and stuff, and she starts off very aristocratic and, you know, like sort of like just enjoying life and, you know, and comfort. But when shit hits the fan and everything goes down, and, you know, like it's clear that the Europeans are losing some ground to some extent, she ends up having to come to terms with how much of a, well, basically how much of a shallow bitch she's been this whole time. And she ends up shaving her head, and she ends up becoming like a commoner. So she goes from in this uplifted place of comfort to being like, you know, in the trenches with everyone else. And it's a moment of real development for that character. And I know it's a bit of a fringe example, but for some reason it was one I was thinking about that I thought was good because it really stuck with me. That's just one that I would throw out there. So And if I think of more, I'll get back on the conversation. But Anna, Cherry.
Yeah, there's this been thing going around Tumblr, and I mean, I know what we say about Tumblr, and to me it feels like it is a small subsection of Tumblr where all the crazies kind of play in their little kiddie pool. But from what I've seen in my experience with Tumblr through like erotic photos and science type stuff, it's been fabulous. Tumblr has been just amazing to me. So there's that. And the cool things that I've seen on Tumblr, such as like in the comment sections, people like debunking bullshit things that other people have been saying. A lot of it actually had to do with feminist statistics, so I guess I've seen like the good side of Tumblr. And I love it. And one of the things that's been circulating a lot is this GIF set of, and yes, I've recently changed my mind to call it back to GIF set instead of GIF. More on that later if anyone's interested. So there's a GIF set of saying, don't write strong women, write, enter, adjective, women. And it usually has interesting, vulnerable, whatever, has a variety of adjectives that all human beings, have, and it's a lot more interesting to write about a character that is something other than a strong woman because it becomes such a trope at this point. And what a strong woman, as Rachel was saying, it is the Mary Sue, that is this impossibly perfect, in every possible way, idea of what a woman should be and what a woman should be like, treating people around her the way she should be treated. Just basically this like queen archetype, and somebody who is managing their social, I guess, image so hard that nobody feels they have any flaws, because of course human beings have flaws. Everybody has flaws and everybody has fuck-ups and everybody is a work in progress. And yet we have women and rad femmes and feminist allies and feminist kin demanding strong, independent women roles, and then turning around and saying that media is portraying women as impossible standards that nobody... You are asking for that. You are asking for these impossible standards that then you can't live up to, and somehow you're still blaming someone other than yourself for that situation. So definitely there's a lot of examples of strong female roles in the way I find strength, which to me, since we're talking about strong female role, there's a difference in how males are presented as strong versus women are presented as strong. But I feel like a compassionate and kind of note should be carried as a show of strength in both of those archetypes, in male and female. And so, for instance, in High School of the Dead, there's Saiko Busujima. She is very kind of quiet. She stays in the background, but she just kind of helps everybody and protects everybody. And she is a mother hen in a way based on her actions. She has that kind of strong, because she kicks ass, strong female mothering kind of attitude, but it doesn't come through with all the negative sides. She doesn't get in anyone's face. She doesn't actively mother. You don't feel like she's oppressing you or breathing down your neck like you would see in a lot of other sitcoms and things, where a strong woman just means that she's a fucking bitch and bossing everybody around horribly. And that to me is not strength. But then you have also on the other side, as a less good character in terms of morality, you have, we talked about House of Cards, like you have the main character's wife. God kill me, I don't remember her name at all. Normally I'm a lot better with names, but yeah, the main character's, Kevin Spacey's character's wife, Robin Wright's character. She who is Princess Bride, by the way, you guys? My mind is totally blown on that. Just total side note. If you're a Princess Bride fan and watching House of Cards.
That's Buttercup?
Yes!
Oh my god, I have to look at her again. Holy shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also Jenny from Forrest Gump.
That
Same
too.
Actress.
She's phenomenal. And while her character is not particularly morally good, I would say at all, she is an incredibly strong woman to me, and they've managed to write a woman who does not compromise on her relationship with her husband. They are very strongly, up until, of course, the last season, as always. Something happens in the other third seasons into the fourth one. They all break, I'm telling you. It's the third season effect. Feminism takes over. But it was really, really good up until then, of her being an integral part of the pair that they're and everything that they're doing together. But she also had her, he valued her opinion. He needed her more than anything. And so they really highlighted that. And I feel like in the last season, spoilers, I don't know if anyone's seen it, they actually have her break off from the main character, and they have her go through kind of a divorce type, wanting to leave after after basically she kind of decided that she wants everything to herself, and that the post that she was given and some attention as the UN, whatever she was given, wasn't enough, and that she needed to basically get something bigger of her own, while Frank Underwood is still solidifying his position as a president, and shit is fucked up for him and for them by extension. So instead of kind of grouping back together into one unit like they had in the beginning in order to achieve the presidential race like they did, she kind of decided that, no, I want more attention, I want more for myself, so she kind of broke off, and that was kind of shitty. But either way, that's also can be seen as a strong woman moment, and kudos to them for writing her as a loving wife and extremely competent in a variety of ways. And so that is basically, I think, what is the main aspect that is missing from the Mary Sue, what makes her so, infallibly like evil almost, because it's like nobody can live up to that. Like, why would you give that to people, give this idea of women as perfect, and that's something nobody can attain at all whatsoever. And you're also making bitchiness and being mean to people be seen as a positive trait that somehow denotes your strength. It doesn't at all. The tiniest dog barks the loudest. The person who has the least amount of confidence is the one who's out there trying to, say that they're the boss and everybody respect them. People who have true confidence, who are truly in control of the situation, they usually are quiet and in the back. And so unless, something needs to be done, and then a clear leader can be presented, and that's fine. That could be a man or a woman, and that has to do with merit. That why we're going back to what's dangling between their legs. Whoever's most competent at assessing the situation, has the most experience with dealing with it, they need to be the leader. It has nothing to do with gender. So you either write complete characters that are strong in the way that a true strong person is, confident and loving and compassionate, while also being a leader when they need to be, or let's just focus on men, women, and this binary that you keep saying, feminists, that you don't want to focus on. So it's like, why do you keep bringing this binary up? Like, just relax and write interesting characters, regardless if they're men or women. Stop fretting about gender so much.
I think one of the places where feminists, when they're talking about characters and who's strong and who's not, is that they really miss the mark on what you were saying right there. I don't think that can be stressed enough. The thing about it is you're talking about strength of character versus physical strength.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about is I actually, if I had to give my pick currently for what's on television now, I'll give you one, and it's actually another role that's done by Eva Green, because like Brian was bringing that up. It's actually on Penny Dreadful, and it's probably the one thing that keeps me watching, even though, sure, the sex and the violence and all of the gothic intrigue is really nice, but the thing that keeps you watching is all of the complex characters, and one in particular is Eva Green's character, Vanessa Ives. At first, when you start watching the show, you think, okay, she's like this practically perfect kind of woman who's got all of these abilities, and there's a lot of mystery surrounding her, what's really going on. But you understand every cunning, her complexity, all of it has come with a price. She suffers for every single bit of it, and she's constantly in a battle with herself for her own soul. It's some crazy shit. It's wonderful television, and that's the thing I've loved about this show, is it actually lets its female characters suffer, and suffer so deeply that you get on board with that character, even though they're complex and you don't know whether they're going to be good or evil by the end of it all. Like, I have no idea if she's going to go good or evil by whatever season they end the show on. I have no idea. But because of the story and because of who she is and what had to happen to get her to that place, you empathize with the character and you're also fascinated by her. And that's what makes me keep watching the show, despite a lot of the what the fuck moments and stuff that goes on with the plot. It's that they've created such complex characters. It's great. They make these literary characters seem real. But that's just me. And that's what I look forward to in a character. Is a character that seems believable, because she is very corruptible, and she's constantly fighting with her own temptation, uh, her own desires, and they're playing it out in a very sort of Catholic kind of good and evil sort of way. So it's kind of nice to see. So I'll let you guys go on.
You know, one of the things that I was taught growing up as a kid, largely by my father, but also by my mother, was that strength isn't an automatic thing. There is a great deal of strength in identifying and overcoming your own flaws and weaknesses, and there is a great deal of strength in knowing the difference between what you want and what is needed and what should be and what you should do. And it's sort of it really shapes which characters I've identified with, especially when I was growing up. My favorite stuff to read was scary stories and sci-fi and mystery and stuff like that. I really didn't get into as much of the ordinary little girls books as others did, but I read Beverly Cleary's Ramona Quimby series, and the the older The Beaches in Ramona book, and the books about Henry. And those were the reason I liked those was because the characters were like you described. They questioned themselves. They learned. I got to read about the characters sort of growing up and learning and shaping themselves into the best people they could be, and falling down and getting back up and things like that. And that in a way kind of shaped that, and the Little House on the Prairie series shaped sort of how I saw female characters in books as I got older. And where I ended up with it was everybody's female character favorite from, say, the Lord of the Rings series is Arwen, and I suppose it's because she's a bit glamorous and everything, but mine is Éowyn. And my reason for particularly identifying with Éowyn is because she does what she sees is needed instead of necessarily what she wants. She has the strength of character to look around and realize the points at which the interests and welfare of her community outweigh her own, and she has the emotional strength to accept when there are things that she wants that are not right or not doable, and to look for happiness where it is achievable and where it'll be beneficial to both herself and others. And you can see that in where she finds love. You can see that in her willingness to abandon her wish for glory and stay inside when she's needed inside, and then her willingness to risk herself when she has to fight the Nazgul. So this is kind of the type of character that I find much more identifiable than, say, the glamorous, the powerful, the showy. As much as I like characters like Wonder Woman and Supergirl and stuff like that, as much as I like Galadriel's beauty and wisdom and everything, that quiet willingness to step up despite maybe not wanting to, I think makes for the strongest character sometimes. It's why my favorite character in the story is, well, Éowyn's my favorite female character. My favorite character in that story is Sam. And it was because he saw a cause, an important cause that he was needed for, and that he stood by his folks, and he was terrified and still did what was right. To me, that's courage. Courage isn't going in unafraid. Courage is when you're just scared shitless and you do what needs to be done anyway. And so those are the types of characters that I see as strong. And I haven't really done a lot of reading more modern writing because I just haven't had time. Most of my reading has been research related, but I have a friend who has been encouraging me to read a series that she's really enjoyed. And that is the Hollow series by Kim Harrison. And the main character, Rachel Morgan, in those stories has those hallmarks of, gosh, I don't want to do this, but it's really necessary, so I will. And she's a character who can see when she screws up and feels responsible for her screw-ups and for fixing those screw-ups. And she's human. And this is exactly like she's a witch in the story, and in the story, witch is a different species than human. But this character is more human than a lot of the characters that you see women gunning for. Please have this character be this, or please have this character be that. It's not identifiable when the character is flawless and when the character gets everything that she wants. And in this story, she doesn't. She loses things, and she mourns for those losses. She has consequences for her mistakes, and she learns from those consequences, but the consequences don't go away just because she learned her lesson. So that's my idea of character strength and what I like to see in characters, male or female.
Allison?
Okay, apologies. Well, what I wanted to comment upon is something that I brought up at the Women into Comics panel that we attended, and I've had some people say that it was a controversial statement. My question was at that panel was, why write strong female characters? And what I meant was, why are we having this discussion about female characters in isolation? Why are we turning women into victims of female characters not being written well, when there's plenty of examples of male characters not being written well, and also plenty of examples of, I would call, very, very weak male characters? The idea that a character's strength is defined by the ability to just sort of slip on his skin and just live out his actions, and he has no interior life, that's a very weak character as far as I'm concerned. It's basically just a cipher or a proxy robot that you occupy for whatever length the movie is or the game is. So, and in a game sense, of course, you want the character that you play to have sort of to be a little generic, because you literally are assuming the choices and actions that he or she is taking. But in a movie sense, there are no real male characters in these movies, really. They're just ciphers. And the reality is that because they're male, we can just get rid of all of their personhood and just don their skin for an hour and a half. They aren't really characters at all. They're just placeholders. And nobody ever points that out. That the action heroes that we like are simply placeholders. They don't even exist as a real entity, human. Like, they don't even give a real sort of subjective quality to them. I mean, they might have a few quirks, but aside from that, they don't really react very strong. Like, they don't react to stuff in a way that you can relate with to. They're always pretty much action, 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 no reaction. And if they do have a reaction, it's usually because they failed to take action properly in some circumstance. You don't get any sense that the activities that they engage in really have an impact on them. I mean, sometimes they explore this a little bit, and it's not across the board. There are some writers who actually seem to have some understanding that this isn't a character. I mean, the most of these male characters aren't characters, so they actually take some effort to write something that can be passably considered human. But I would argue that the only characters we have in most of our media are women and automaton, robots. We don't even have male characters because we have no ability to conceive of the interior life of male characters, and they certainly do not have an interior life as robust as female characters. So when I ask why write strong female characters, what I mean by that is, why are we only asking this question about women? Why aren't we also asking it about men? And if you cannot ask that question about what it means to write a strong male character, then you're not writing strong female characters either. So, and then the final conclusion of all this is that bad writing is not sexism. Writers who just rely on lazy thinking are not necessarily sexist. They're just lazy, unentertaining writers. And I'll let Mike go on with that.
Well, yeah, it's two kinds of ways of badly writing a character. And you said it's women and automatons, but it's two different kinds of automaton. And the one way, a bad way of writing characters you've just described is they don't refer to their own wants, their own desires. They're completely unselfish. They are there to rack the plot forward. And the other extreme is what we were just talking about bad female characters, where it's all about their own experience. They don't have the wherewithal to sacrifice for the sake of moving things on, for the sake of the world. It's all about their personal experience and what's happening to them. And it's not to say that that's necessarily a female thing and that the other is necessarily a male thing, but what we have ended up with a cultural situation where we mainly put women in the first mistake and mainly put men in the second. And it's simply a case of, writing male characters who are a bit more assertive about their own experiences and writing female characters who are a bit more concerned with sacrificing for the sake of moving things on. I don't know why that's as difficult as it sounds. Maybe we make it sound more difficult than it is, or maybe someone else is. I don't know. Stop now.
Well, I think there are some really deep social attitudes that are completely unexamined by this. And it's the same thing that happens. I mean, feminism bills itself as being against traditional roles, but the most traditional role of all for women is a receptacle for men's actions. And what is being a victim? Like the panel that I was on before I spoke, every woman there was talking about how she was a victim of geek or gamer culture or geek or gamer men. And this is a perpetual thing that I see in feminism. And being a receiver of men's actions and just reacting to men's actions is a classic traditional gender role for women. And even though feminists say they challenge it, they actually, all they've really done is codify it and make it more strong, like more of a purified essence of this traditional role for women. And so I think that even when you say you want to challenge something, you have to be really, 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 really doubting of yourself to get the whole of that and to get underneath that kind of socialization and just rote learning that supports these tropes. And I don't think a lot of the writers, especially in Hollywood, really do the work to actually create something innovative and really question the things that need to be questioned. First of all, they never say in response to why do you write strong female characters? They never say something, well, I actually am more, or I actually write strong characters, or I actually question how people write male characters. They never say that they have an overall concern with characterization. It's always just the focus on women once again being victims of a particular type of characterization. And there you see that they're still falling prey to the same problem that creates these lazy stereotypes. So, oh, just a sec. I'm gonna look at my notes here. So what you end up with is, like Mike was saying, you end up with two different lazy ways of writing men and lazy ways of writing women. And one of the things that happens with female characters is they tend to become very limited in their motivation. I mean, they can either be motivated by having been raped or wronged somehow, or motivated by what? Let me throw this out to the panel before we go to the next speaker. Name some motivations for women in movies.
Usually, women are motivated in movies, and this is a product of lazy writing, by stuff that men have done to them.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. Women simply become a reflection of men's actions, and they don't question that. Women are motivated by something a man has done to them, and then there's no motivation, very little motivation outside of that. They're either motivated by that, or there's just somebody along for the ride who just responds to shit happening, so that they can have the reaction shot. They don't seem to very often motivated by putting themselves second, helping, preserving society, protecting society. Oh, they could be motivated by their own self-preservation, but they're not motivated by more heroic virtues that puts other people first.
Yeah, I was about to say, so we talk about Princess Leia, because that's one that always comes up, that she's a strong character, a sacrificing character. But like you said, she's basically reacting to, well, it's something a man did, but it's blow up her home planet, so...
You just had to bring up the most intolerable character, in my opinion. I cannot stand Leia. She is a constant bitching, raging, flopping vagina. I can't just get her out of my face, please.
Well, you're just a scruffy-looking nerf herder.
I don't have as much of a problem with Leia because at the very least she was trying to do something. I mean, you could argue that, yeah, it was a man she was fighting against, but in many ways, everybody was the evil emperor.
I take issue. I take issue in particular with the attitude of this is something that is more dear to me, I guess, and also not so much of a fandom for Star Wars personally, but in terms of this idea, like they have in Naruto and Sakura as well, where they have the woman be extremely bitchy and tsundere, completely withholding of all feelings and attraction, show of attraction towards a man, and he is like pining after her and is in love with her. And that to me is extremely damaging because me personally and other people, other girls, basically grew up on this stuff. They grew up on seeing the Helga Pataki, like I don't know if the references might be going over your heads, but it's like some 90s stuff, 90s cartoons. But they have this character that's like really, really bitchy to the one that she really likes. And that's supposed to be the show of her love, which is extremely immature, like, kicking a boy in kindergarten when you like him. And he is like pining after this woman that is being completely bitchy to him, and the reason he likes her is because she won't give him any love or attention, and it's just completely gross, I think.
I'm sorry if you guys are done. I think that the reason why we're having this is actually coming up is because there is some kind of influence that affects people who create creative content. It doesn't have to influence them, but as evidenced by what happened with Allison when she went on the panel, there is something that is there that people are, either consciously or not consciously aware of that affects them when they sit down to write female characters specifically. I don't think it comes from sexism per se, but I think that there is like this, make sure that she doesn't have any flaws, make sure that whatever happens to her, we need to be sympathetic with this character in some way because otherwise we don't want to look at her in a negative light. This is why when they rewrote Sleeping Beauty and called it Maleficent, they had to change Maleficent's background to make her a victim of something that happened. When originally, in the old animated Sleeping Beauty that Disney put out, she was just evil. Just because. She was evil and petty, and that was it. And that was enough. Now, we didn't... For some reason, we have this weird thing now where we think if we see a woman portrayed as flawed or just downright bad, that somehow that's reflecting on all women everywhere in the world that ever lived. And that we have to be very careful not to do that. And that we have to constantly be, like, basically walking on eggshells around these fictional things because they might affect real people. This is the reason why we had problems with the Joker cover, or the Batgirl cover, rather. This is why we had problems with, all these sort of, like, fairy tale villains. And most often when you see these kinds of characters, these women characters that are, if they're flawed in some way, like in Frozen, it's because someone else did something to them, and it's usually a dude that did it. Or it was bad parenting, or it was magic or something. So that's one of the things that I think gets in the way of doing this. That's why for me, one of my favorite recent female characters in the film Dredd, which is essentially Judge Dredd with, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was in Lord of the Rings. Oh, shit. But it was a really good movie. There was the woman from Game of Thrones was in it. She played the villainess. Her name was Mama, and she was like this prostitute, and she was just bad. She was just a bad person, and so likable because when you write male villains in stories, they they usually are just, I mean, if you don't want to get too deep into it, because some kinds of film, if you're doing a drama, then it's better to understand the characters because it's more character driven. If you're doing something that's more like an action movie or something that you're supposed to like just sort of sit back and enjoy, then if the villain's just kind of a psycho, that's okay, because the point of it is not really about the character development. It's more about, just having a good time and seeing like the hero save the day. It just sort of depends on what the goal is. One of the other things, so I really like Mama. I thought she was really great. One of the other things that I notice that you don't see, and I think this is also due to that same sort of like element that sort of manifests, that miasma of like being cautious about how you write your female characters, is that male characters that are heroes that go on a hero's journey or have to like basically achieve a certain level of capability before they can overcome some kind of obstacle. You often see that in movies like, let's say, a boxing film or Karate Kid or any number of kung fu movies where the main character doesn't really know kung fu, but then he meets a master and he teaches him. Oftentimes they go through a lot of struggle to develop and build and like get better at something so that they can, overcome whatever the obstacle is later. And that often results in a lot of hardship, but it also changes the character fundamentally. Female main characters don't usually go through that, and part of it, I think, has to do with this weird, aversion that people have to making these characters struggle to get better or to improve or whatever. And you very rarely see it. One example of a case where you do is like Kill Bill, where the bride has to learn kung fu, so she goes to the kung fu master. Or in sometimes it's not because of some teacher that shows them, like in G.I. Jane, but it might be just because they have to experience hardship, and then they come out the other side changed. The film Gravity is good for that, which Sandra Bullock was in. G.I. Jane, I already mentioned. There was... Actually, in Terminator, the first Terminator, Sarah Connor starts off as sort of like a common blonde, like just kind of doing her thing, and then after her experience with the Terminator, when Terminator 2 comes around, she's a completely changed woman, and it's due to the hardship that she experienced. And I have an appreciation for that kind of writing, and you also bond with the character more because they do go through those struggles, and they do deal with that. And with male characters, you see that, like, it's actually easier for people to do it because we have, I don't want to say less sympathy, because I think that that's unfair. I think that women can experience that and come out better as well. But for some reason, there's a natural aversion to doing that, like to just letting that be. And that's why you have, like, when you see those sorts of things happen with female characters, if they're not, they're often not experiencing that hardship or that, those developmental processes, but instead there's something else that happened that they're just kind of born with it, like in Frozen again, Elsa just has ice powers, and Maleficent was just a fairy and she just had powers, and in Wicked, I never actually didn't watch Wicked, but you have that same thing where you have like this character that was just bad, the Wicked Witch of the West, and then we had to sympathize with her. And that might be, sometimes that can be a good thing, but I think that when you do that often enough, where it's sort of like, let's understand Cruella de Vil, we want to find out why she's this way.
Oh, God.
You lose that thing where it's like, I used to just like hating her. Like, you're never going to see like a thing where, I don't know, like Gaston's backstory comes out and it turns out he was like beaten by his father or his mother, and like it made him this way. You're not going to see that. You're not supposed to sympathize with him because he's the villain in a story that is told in a really simple way. So I'm sorry, I dragged that on. Does anybody else want to talk?
Yeah, I actually was waiting, but I wanted to speak to the Wicked Witch of the West, the books. I think they were actually really well written, and it was interesting. But she still was a bit of an extremist and morally questionable, while being more interesting as a character. And I enjoyed that. I liked the complexities that were added into that. But what I wanted to say is that I think part of the problem is we use female characters as sort of the moral measuring sticks for the story. So whatever happens to them determines what is good or bad in the story narrative. When you do that, the less capable the woman is, the better she can function as a moral measuring stick. So if you're going to focus on a female character's abilities, you reduce that function in the story that they have, that everything is judged by how it affects them. So the villain is a villain because he's negative towards the damsel. The hero is the hero because he saves the damsel. The comedic character is the comedic characters because he's useless to help the damsel. She essentially decides each role, and
You can't have a measuring stick that changes size or shape.
Yeah, then it becomes.
So none of the characters. So what should be the measuring stick, Alison?
What
Hopefully
should
you'll get to that. Yeah.
I actually think it's possible to have each character play that role in turn. It might make a much more complex story that you have to actually go in and see the story from every character's angle.
Yeah, the measuring stick doesn't even have to be a character. It can be something to do with the scenery or the story. It can be man versus nature. It can be man versus technology. That sort of thing.
Yeah, but in this case, the simplest measuring stick to use is a woman, and you can see the process of women being sort of reduced down to measuring sticks of the story. Whenever something big happens, watch for something impactful happening, and then a shot of a woman reacting. That's the most classic. Like you will, once I've told you to watch it, you will see it everywhere. This is the essential thing. This is what you have to challenge. If you really want to challenge these bland female characters that simply react to things and are along for the ride just to tell us how we should feel about something, then you have to challenge the social role of women as measuring moral and emotional and consequence measuring stick for men's actions. And that is very difficult to do. I mean, if you challenge it, you might just end up banned. I'm laughing. I'm actually, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move away from that. But
Laughter is good. Laughter is healthy.
Sometimes you have to laugh or you go insane.
Oh no, I know. I mean, I don't really have the option to stay in a place of sorrow. I gotta move out of it. So.
Well, yeah, your opponent who is trying to smash you really wins if they manage to achieve it by making you unable to respond to situations like this with laughter.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with that. And it's like, but that's the thing. The more incapable women are of actually recovering from something, the more capable they are of using their own actions to achieve something, the less useful they are as a measuring stick for other people's actions. The more firm women are, the less they are pliable they are. The less that men's actions mark them. So it's this tension which creates these, like I said, these bland female characters that are just around to react to things.
It's sad that we've gotten to this point, honestly, because one of my favorite stories from when I was growing up didn't have any characters in it. It's a Ray Bradbury story. I put it in our chat, and that was called "There Will Come Soft Rains." It's a short story about a house that is like a smart house, basically, and it ends up an unexpected thing occurs, and the house ends up being destroyed by a fire, all except for one wall, which continues to function at the end of the story. But the point of what I'm saying is this idea that we have to, we can and have to and cannot escape from ourselves being shaped by how people write characters and stories and everything. That it's some kind of an attack on women for women in stories to be written differently than feminists want, or anything like that. It just kind of blows my mind, because it just really tells me how far we've gotten away from the depths of really strong story writing to where we have to depend on things like that.
Yeah.
Rachel, I think, has to say.
Yeah. I was going to say something to this. When we talk about the morality of these stories and everything, do you want to know what is usually the measurement that I have for whether or not things are going to get interesting in the movie or something is going to happen, that I may not anticipate upon? And that's usually the level of violence or how people in general are treated very early on in the story. If something abrupt happens to any of the characters as incredibly unexpected, it gives you an idea of how bad shit can get from here on in. If you have the untimely death of something like a child and nobody gives a shit, it lets you know about exactly how bad or how interesting, like what are the guidelines? How bad can things get? What are the limitations within this universe? How morally corrupt or how morally bankrupt are people are going to be in this story? It gives you that early on, and I'm like, you know what? I'm entirely invested at that point. If something just horrible happens, male or female, I'm ready at that point on, because I know that they're not going to fuck around with me. They're not going to flirt around with how bad things are going to get and just drag me on. I'm like, oh, well, it can't possibly get worse. It lets you know that things can get infinitely worse from that point on. So yeah, that's just me.
There's a great TED Talk by an astronaut, and the thing he says about space is that there's no problem in space that you can't make worse. And that's the first thing and the only thing that they learn, along with having to learn Russian because having to talk to Russian astronauts. But anyway, that totally reminded me of that.
Yeah.
So
that's my measuring stick.
No, yeah.
Speaking of relationships in space,
Allison. So yeah, I was just gonna say, since Allison and I both make comics and there's like female characters in them, I wanted to ask Allison how she goes about writing her character, specifically her lead female character, in terms of its complexity and how you approach it. Not that I think that there's like some secret Philosopher's Stone formula to doing it. I actually don't think it's very complex, but just sort of like your approach.
My approach? I just write a character. I didn't really explicitly set up to write her character and to be strong necessarily or anything other than what she is. Just to be an interesting character.
Right.
Trying to think how I might say something about that. Well, I guess I could describe the character a little bit. That might help. My main female character is named Ankoa. She's Polynesian, of Polynesian extraction, I suppose you could say. She comes from a culture that has cultural mores that are very, very different from our own, even though she is technically human. In her culture, because of the constraints on genetic diversity and the complexity of replicating the whole process, the whole male reproductive process, what they've found is actually more complex and more expensive than replicating the female reproductive process, simply because of the amount of hormonal issues. And you'd understand this if you'd ever watched this particular TEDx on why it's extremely difficult to get a male birth control. The female scientist who was working on this issue, she wrote down two formulas. One was a line long, and the other one took up an entire whiteboard. And then she asked, which one do you think is a man and which one do you think is a woman? And of course everyone was like, oh, the complex one was, no, it's not. Men's reproductive biology is far more complex than women's, because men are constantly producing genetic diversity, whereas women, we got 400, 500, whatever, and that's it. And this is the limitation that her culture beat up against when they started going out into space. In other words, it was cheap to reproduce women, expensive to reproduce men, and mechanically, or almost impossible. So that she is essentially part of a culture in which she is expendable. And I think it's the same principle why most hive species have the drones are female. She is expendable, and I mean she's that's the kind of mentality that she has. She doesn't feel that she has that innate value. Um, and I mean she essentially in her life she went into the military to get a scholarship. She ended up as a weapons and engine scientist, and that's her basic story. But a lot of her motivation is something that we don't necessarily relate to as women because we don't know what it's like to live in a society where, you don't have any value unless you build it. But she does, and so she reacts in that way. And I mean, for example, one thing that she might say is in response to people who say that women aren't strong enough to be in the army. Well, it doesn't matter how strong you are if you're too valuable to be expendable. I mean, physically, the men in her culture may be stronger, but if they can't be expended, you can't actually sacrifice them in service of a goal. So this is the mentality that shaped her. And so I tried to just get into the head of someone like that, and how she would respond to things, how she would act, how she would think of herself, and also some entertaining confrontations with women who don't think in the same way. And yeah, so that's how I wrote her. I wrote her as a creature of her time and place, but she's also, I mean, she's flawed too. Like, I mean, that I don't know if that would be considered a flaw, as just a social pressure. She does things that are really morally questionable. She has some very extreme responses to things. She is a very dangerous person, quite legitimately dangerous. She gets called out on that multiple times because of that kind of extremism that she has, extreme nihilism that she has. And yeah, and I think that's part of having a female character you can relate to, is they have flaws that other people call them out on and say, this is an inappropriate behavior, stop it. And they have points where someone else is the moral measuring stick for their actions, rather than being the moral measuring stick for everyone else, and also being so much more better at everything than everyone else, which is almost incomprehensible. You can't wrap your mind around it. So anyway,
you know how Darth Vader explodes a planet at the first chapter of Star Wars, like, for political reasons? The second chapter of Xenospora, and like does it for no fucking reason. Yeah.
No, actually, that's a simulation. That she doesn't do it for no fun. That's a simulation. It's not real. Okay,
but she would.
Nothing's real, Alison.
Yeah, well, oh yeah, right. But it's a simulation within a simulation. So technically, she's not responsible for genocide or anything. She just was showing that she could do this, which in and of itself is sort of fucked up. But anyway.
Yes. Hannah? Hannah?
We have to go deeper. Obviously Hannah has run off.
Well, no. Okay, so what I'll try to unmute you. Hold on.
Well, we should probably not just have people listening to us fumble. Although I'm sure at this point.
Okay. Sorry. I've like been sitting there messing with a button for 2 or 3 minutes and gotten completely lost, and I've forgotten exactly what it was I was going to originally say. So so continue talking about Allison's characters.
I was just gonna say that Allison basically started the answer to the question, how do you write your characters, in the exact way that people should do it, which is simply, I want to write a good character. You see, one of the biggest things that I see that I run into constantly, especially these days, is people start when they want to write a character or make a film or write a book or have a TV show or make a video game, and they want to put a female character in the lead or in as one of the supporting characters. They start by saying, I want a strong female character, instead of saying, I want a good character. And when you start with that thought, strong female character is the first thing you enter from, you have already limited your options. You have already created boundaries for
You've already isolated
writing.
the character from the story.
You've already compromised what you can do with the story. You can. Oh, Anna, did you want to
Well, I
say
was going to say that's exactly right. That it's just really interesting that you guys bring that up because basically what we're talking about here in a certain way is ideology of a type. Because like Allison was saying, her character is a product of her time and her situation, which means that you're approaching writing this from okay, what is the time, what is the situation, this is the framework, and then when you have people coming at it from strong female character perspective, they also have a framework in which they're operating. They're just not as cognizant of it, and that framework is that, well, women are oppressed and there's a patriarchy, blah blah, so we need to overcompensate, we need to overemphasize these things. So they basically are operating on an ideology without necessarily being aware of it, but they're also approaching things from what is the time and what is the place, and that is a fucked up time and place that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, but you basically when you start from like female as your first descriptor, you reduce that character immediately to just working within that framework. Why does Ellen Ripley work really well in Aliens? Watch that film, see how many times her being a woman comes up, which is almost fucking never. Watch the Terminator films with Sarah Connor. How many times is her being a woman or people treating her in a certain way because of that come up? Almost never. The only thing that makes Sarah Connor important is that she's going to give birth to a man that's going to save the future. Well, there's a drinking game that I dare you guys to play, those of you who are listening, okay? There's all these trailers for the Avengers Age of Ultron that's coming out this week, and they've had various spots for each, member of the Avengers team for the comics. There's one commercial that's all about the female characters. And watch it and listen to how many times they say strong female character. I swear to God, it's like it's just being drilled into your head, and I'm like, why aren't you just showing up? Like, you're not treating them the same as everyone else. You're treating them differently. Why are you doing that? There's something really sexist about that. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, and it doesn't need to be there. This is why Agent Carter falls on its face, in my opinion. So I'm going to give it to Mike.
Yeah, well, so we're saying if you insist on having a strong female character, then you're starting somewhere that you can't start. If you start with a strong character, that doesn't mean you're going to get a strong world formed around them, because you can't hang an entire world, you can't pin an entire world on a character, not in this context anyway. But if you by building an interesting world, then it will naturally produce, if you play around with that world, it will naturally produce interesting characters. Just like if you lay good soil, you'll get good flowers. It's all very straightforward, people.
Well, I would say that that's true, and I like I was pointing out, interjecting for Brian, when you start by saying, I'm going to write a strong female character, you're already isolating that character from the story, because what if the story requires a woman who isn't necessarily strong in the way that you're saying? Or what if it requires a different approach? You're already saying that this character is going to not be really integrated into the story, and that's going to show. And the other thing is that I think Brian is right, and I want to pull that out. The position that people take when they start to write, or maybe it was Anna who brought this up, the position that people take when they start to write so-called strong female characters is that women are oppressed by the portrayal of women in the media. So what they're doing is they are reducing women down to how they've been affected by men, and then saying, because women are receptacles of men's actions, we need to portray them as not receptacles of men's actions. Well, maybe you should start by questioning your own assumptions about women and men if you want to write so-called strong female characters. You start by questioning your belief that women are basically defined as being receptacles for men's actions in ways that, or receive men's actions in ways that men do not receive women's actions. and see where that takes you in terms of creating characters that are interesting and dynamic, and female characters that have motivations beyond what been done wrong by some man, and that's sort of like that's part of the thing that I explored is just what would a society look like if men were the moral center, and also what would society look like if men and women shared the moral center, and what would society look like if women shared the moral center but everybody's brains were attached to enormous algorithms that can crunch huge amounts of data based anyway. So it's like look at the basic level of assumptions that you're starting from and question them. And I don't think that a lot of people who are talking about strong female characters are doing that. All right, go ahead, Hannah.
Well, the thing I had wanted to talk about earlier, and it's a little unrelated to some of what we've been talking about, but in a way it has its own relation. I think the focus on characters is overdone. And it's like I said before with the Ray Bradbury story, there are things about storytelling that characters are more of an accessory than they are the story. And some of this comes from me being raised by English teachers, so I know a lot of the stories that were used in classrooms to make points to students about things. And this one is no different. The story I'm referring to here is Geraldine Moore the Poet by Tony Cade Bambara, and I hope I'm pronouncing that last name right. And this is something we've talked about, some pretty big and open ways in which a character can be portrayed as strong. This goes to a very subtle method of portraying character strength and using character strength not as a main thing in the story, but as an accessory to making the point the story makes. And the story actually makes multiple subtle points. Geraldine's the main character. The beginning of the story describes her circumstances of poverty, her family being put out in the street and taken in by a neighbor because they can't pay their bills. And she sees this happening. She takes her situation in. She is clearly unhappy about it, picks herself up, and goes on with her life. And that is her strength. That she doesn't think about being a victim. She doesn't think about how terrible it is and how hard it is at that moment. She just goes on with what she needs to do. And it goes on through her school day and goes through her classroom situations and into her English class, her literature class. And her teacher, Mrs. Scott, who displays strength in an entirely different way, in that she displays the strength of being able to take a lesson from where it is offered. Even though she is the person in charge, she's supposed to be the teacher. She learns from her student and picks something up that she really didn't have maybe before. She asks the students to write a poem, and she goes on about poetry as this beautiful, lovely thing, describing a picture of your life in a flowery way and things like that. And the way she describes it, Geraldine, of course, having gone through rough times, does not identify with at all. And so she doesn't know what to do. And as this teacher is going around the classroom looking at people's poems and giving compliments and encouragement and so on, she comes to Geraldine, and Geraldine has to explain that she can't write a poem. And Mrs. Scott says, "Why not?" And Geraldine goes on and explains why not. And the way she explains it, she describes her situation in abstract ways, in a way. And Mrs. Scott gathers from her words a poem. And it's see if I opened the page. "Nothing lovely's been happening in my life. I haven't seen a flower since Mother's Day, and the sun don't even shine on my side of the street. No robins come sing on my windowsill. Just the rain comes, and the bills come, and the men to move out our furniture. I'm sorry, but I can't write no pretty poem. And it gives the sign of strength, the teacher being able to take that and write it on the board and point out to the classroom, this is also a poem. This is the best poem that you will ever hear. And she actually says that to the class. You have just heard the best poem that you will ever hear. She's able to explain to the class that being able to express one's life circumstances that way is more poetic than creating something pretty. And that right there is about the greatest description that you can get of how to write strong characters and how to write strong stories. When you tell a story, you're creating a metaphor that is intended to both entertain and communicate something about life and humanity and existence. And it doesn't matter if it's pretty. It doesn't matter if it is politically correct. In fact, those things, striving for those things, can handicap your storytelling. And I guess that's the best way I could think of to express that. Really was to reference that that particular material, because that's the lesson that I take away from it and took away from it years ago when we had it in class. Is that no matter how deep into fantasy you get, and no matter how deep into the entertainment aspect of the storytelling you get, if you lose sight of the fact that you're actually attempting to communicate reality, you've really lost your ability to tell stories at all.
That is something to think about. Thank you, Hannah. I think we're going to get close to wrapping up the show, but before we do, I wanted to list off a couple of movies. Yes, we are wrapping this up. And ask you guys in the panel, if you've seen the film, I'm going to try and go as mainstream as possible so that, there's a good chance you have. And tell me what you each think about the female character that I'm going to name. One of the things that I've noticed that I really like, this just as an aside, I like films where you have a main male and female lead in them, and by the end of the film, they do not end up a couple. That's very rare, and I think that's why I like it, especially when it feels really forced, when they would normally, you're just like, why are they getting together? It just feels tacked on, but there's a lot of good movies that don't do that, or at least a few. So, all right, so I'm going to start. Jessica Rabbit. What do you guys think about from Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
I think she was awesome.
I hear she makes a
drawn that way.
Yeah, I hear she makes a mean carrot cake.
I
don't know.
I mean, she went for Bunny or Bugs or whatever the fuck his name is, Roger. Yeah, there you go. Regardless of his looks, so kudos.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
That's actually the thing I liked about her, was that statement on being able to. It was a offhanded statement. What it was a statement on being able to value people, and that includes men, which is something that doesn't often get stated when we talk about valuing people for more than their looks.
Now it is.
He makes me laugh.
Yeah.
That's one thing about Jessica Rabbit I like too.
Yeah.
I always liked the character. I think she was unfairly maligned, perhaps, by feminists. I always thought she stood by Roger Rabbit. It wasn't a heck of a lot of.
She just looked provocative, but she wasn't actually. She wasn't bad. She was just drawn that way. She wasn't actually a bad person.
Okay, maybe we should move on to the next one.
Okay. In the original 1987 RoboCop, his partner, Officer Ann Lewis.
Oh, pretty good. I'm sure it's pretty cool if I remember. I don't really remember her as much, though.
He was just
I remember her haircut.
It's been forever since I've seen that movie.
No, I remember her haircut. I remember that they said that the director kept making them cut it shorter because he was trying to go for more androgynous. He was trying to go as androgynous as possible because he really wanted it to make clear that she was not a sexual interest or a romantic interest.
Of course, no matter what they did, God, I can't remember the name of the actress, but they could not make her anything but cute. She was a very cute actress. Period. There's underlined. There's nothing they could do about that.
Yeah, her name was.
The one thing I remember from it was that she was actually invested in seeing him as a person and reminding other people to see him as a person, despite all of the changes that made him not look person-like to people.
Ann Lewis was great because her and RoboCop were just comrades. They were partners, nothing more. Nancy, her name was Nancy Allen. That was the actress's name. And she was still cute, even though they tried to make her look, androgynous or tomboyish or whatever. But you never got the impression that she was fragile. She was tough. She was as tough as she could be. You know what I'm saying?
On that note, it's a lot like T'Pol from Enterprise, because they had the hair and the eyebrows and like she still was like super banging hot, even though she was all Spock-like and logical.
Yeah. All right, so next is Uhura. I was going to say Uhura from Star Trek after that, from the television series specifically.
She was kind of useless, to be honest. I'm sorry, I like the show, but she was just to me, it didn't show like they cared about her, but it didn't seem like what she did was as important as any of the other TNGs.
In some cases,
she actually was an engineer.
Yeah, I feel like they didn't really highlight that at all. Unlike there's that Asian girl in Enterprise, I think it was, and then in TNG they also had a communications whoever, and they were their role was super critical, to talk to people and communicate shit. It was whoa, they really played up their importance, but I feel like they didn't, to me anyway, play up Uhura's importance as much. But obviously she was an important member.
The reputation of the communications degree has been somewhat tarnished of late.
Yeah. I see what you did there.
This is true.
Allison, did you want to say something about Uhura? I thought you did.
No, Hannah covered it. She was an engineer, and she did have the ability to work with she built computers.
Yes.
So there was she had competence there. She just wasn't spotlighted, and you could argue that a lot of characters weren't outside of the big three.
Pretty much. That's true.
Well, and that partly may have had to do with the time period as well. Although there were a lot of things that they did that were not fitting to the time period, that were sort of new and different, but they still cannot be measured by today's standards. And you can't apply today's standards to yesterday and get an accurate understanding of the way things were done.
But also something that occurred to me about sci-fi and things like that, we were talking with Rachel on the Tales from the Infrared show, and there was this thing about white male nerd privilege. Well, it made me realize that shows like Star Trek, for instance, and others were the first ones to actually have minorities and things like that in lead roles, and at least involved in television. Such that a lot of people watching it were like, oh my God, you were the first, Asian, to George Takei, for instance, you were the first Asian man that wasn't completely stereotyped and useless in TV, and I really related. So it's hello, these white nerds, white male nerds are the ones that brought you fucking diversity. Diversity.
Yeah. The Starship Enterprise was in its own way, it was sort of a military type setting. How many shows back then portrayed that type of dynamic, men and women working together in the same setting, where they were where they were sort of equals and where the level of responsibility so this was actually this was rather forward thinking there.
Progressive thinking.
Okay, progressive.
All
right. Here's the next one. Ramona Flowers, Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Oh, it's just complicated. I know it. I will say that she's kind of an interesting character. In some ways, she got on my nerves because she couldn't deal with all of the evil exes or anything like that, with the exception of the one time that she helped fight off one female ex because he had problems hitting girls. But I mean, that was the whole thing. She kind of let everything happen to her. She didn't really take as much charge, even though she was totally capable of fighting, and you saw that happen. I'm like, why don't you come up against Gideon, damn it? Why don't you kick his ass if he's gonna try and fuck with your love life? I mean, okay, and what I mean by kick ass is that in this they're making it very much anime-esque, kind of a video game-esque. And playing on that sort of thing. So, I mean, why don't you help out? In fact, she did, I think, help out somewhat in towards the end. But I mean, it was kind of weird because, like, why can't you just tell all of your exes to fuck off? Really, tell them to fuck off.
It's difficult to sympathize with Ramona Flowers. Because she doesn't appear to take responsibility for her bad choices. But she kind of does, and you do, like, sympathize to some degree. I don't know. Like, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it's really tough because, on the one hand, I'm pissed that she's, like, making Scott go through all of these hoops to deal with shit, and then, in the end, okay, they finally end up together, okay, whatever. But it's like, take some charge over your own life. Like, tell your exes to fuck off. I mean, she was totally capable of fighting as well, as you saw, when she was battling her other ex, like her female ex.
The one
thing I
will give credit, though, at the end of the day with Scott Pilgrim that made it great was the ultimate thing that he needed was self-respect, and that is a really powerful statement. So, aside from whatever happened after he gained self-respect, like whether he ended up with Ramona or not, is irrelevant because he got that. He could have easily just been like, I'm going to be by myself. And that would have been fine, too. That's a very unusual thing to see with male characters.
Exactly. And that's why I can't really hate Scott Pilgrim versus the World as a movie, because in the end, he realized, like, all this stuff, he thought he was, trying to save the princess sort of shit, when in reality, what he really needed to do was save himself and stand up for himself. And, handle the shit.
All right. Let me see. Last one, I think. What is Jessie from Toy Story.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. I don't know. She's a cowgirl?
I don't know. Character. She's not bad. She does step up when things are needed. She steps up. I mean, she still acts like a girl. Yeah, in a stereotypical.
Her femininity.
Yeah. But she does step up. She doesn't shy away from taking responsibility for being there for her friends, or taking responsibility for addressing when she's faced with a problem. She doesn't go, "Oh, help me! Somebody take care of this for me!" So that's a good character.
She goes yeehaw and tries to do her best. And she's down with she doesn't put herself before everyone else.
Although I don't know, I still think her is kind of a token in her own way. I think she was there to sort of provide a balance for a gender balance for Woody and create a romantic interest, put a romantic interest into the story, but it wasn't badly done.
Yeah, I was thinking I was either going to pick her or Elastigirl from The Incredibles. I actually really like that character.
I like Elastigirl.
She starts off kind of kind of gung-ho about being a female superhero, but by the time she settles down and has a family, she's more concerned about being a good mother. She sort of grows up, and I like that about her. So,
me too, actually.
I know there's a ton of other characters I didn't mention.
Oh, I've got one.
You got one
for the panel. If you haven't read it, you're not going to know what to say, and if you have, this could go on for some time. But have you read Charlotte's Web?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Charlotte.
Oh yeah.
Go on.
Oh, the spider. That fucking destroyed me.
Receptive and actually seeing what was going on around her, that was pretty cool. Her becoming just as invested in the animal characters in the story as she is in herself is pretty cool.
Oh gosh!
But she was portrayed as awfully wise for a child.
I got one. Mrs. Brisby, Secret of Nim.
Oh God, yeah.
The
That was
Yes.
That's like
fabulous. Fabulous.
I read that in 1980.
It's really good if you haven't seen it.
Oh, I
Yeah.
saw the cartoon.
Yeah, Anna, you need to watch the movie. Watch the movie too. It's good.
Yeah.
There
It's
is a
good.
character that I actually, the thing I like about her was that she took great risk and faced her fears for her children. If
Yes.
I'm thinking of the main female character,
Yeah.
Mrs. Brisby, right?
Yeah.
Mrs. Brisby is the lead female, the mother.
Okay, the mom. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about the shrew character?
The what?
The shrew character that basically said,
True. Yeah. Screw her. She was
the shrew. She said to Brisby, you're fighting for your children's lives. You got to suck it up.
Yeah. That is a wise character.
Yeah, she's a bit of a busybody, but she had some wise words
Yeah.
to say.
That's
I got one.
really good. And you
I got one.
You don't see that too often.
Sometimes you have to be a busybody. And if you are invested in the welfare of your community, and I just realized Mike was not talking about the little girl. You were talking about Charlotte herself, weren't you?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine.
So it goes to the same thing. The busybody. And Charlotte was a busybody. She saw the way things were and decided to get involved when she didn't have to. She could have just, let's just let this go and everything. Sometimes you have to be a busybody if you're invested in the welfare of your community.
I have a character. Actually, it's kind of two characters back to back, and the way that sort of works. Lady Stark and Bran of Tarth. Like the dynamic there was a really nice contrast. But you can speak to either character. I mean, Bran of Tarth is sort of the character who grows up being very tall and rather plain, and she chooses a different life for herself. She knows she can never be considered a real knight, but she aspires to those kinds of that kind of code of chivalry. And you have Lady Stark, who has a very different kind of strength. Like, this is from Game of Thrones. Sorry, I should have mentioned. It has a different kind of strength, and Bran actually commented on that. It's the kind of a strength that a mother has. She knows that she doesn't have the sort of physical strength, but she does have a strength of character, and needed it to be involved with her family and to take care of them and make sure everything's all right. But yeah, so they sort of they handle things in very different ways, and the contrast is very. I think it's really great.
Yeah. There's probably tons more. My fucking phone's ringing now. What great timing. But I think we're just gonna call it unless anyone else has anything else they want to add. And I'm gonna take that as a no.
Please donate to our legal fund at www.badger.com. Also access it through our website at Let Me Help. It's really appreciated if you do, because it may have to come to that. So
it likely will. And I think that even though things turned out the way they did, we started something. I think I've noticed that more and more people are speaking up, and other cons are being contacted. There was the thing that happened in Denver, and people are having discussions about this. And yes, it was very unfortunate. It was a terrible setback, and it was actually really disheartening for us. Although I will never forget getting the opportunity to meet you guys, and I'm not exaggerating. I thought it was just it's surreal. I'm still reeling from getting to meet you people in person. But I think that this is something that someone had to do, and I'm glad that I was part of that group that did it. Was at least the most prominent. And I hope that you guys in the chat that are watching now or will watch later on once this is up on the tubes of you will see that this is not something that is impossible. Like they can't silence us all. they really don't have a leg to stand on in that regard, and we have to start, letting them know that we have a place here and that this is our culture as much as anyone else's that wants to be a part of it, whether they create content or they just enjoy it. And many of us, it's our livelihood. It's something we're very passionate about, and that shouldn't, these people can't stand in the way of that. And you guys, you're the reason this community of geekery is something that I hold very dear to my own heart. It's something that I grew up with, and I don't want to let it go. I don't want it to be policed or controlled in this way. So just remember that we did it. You can do it. Let more and more people stand up and be counted, be heard, and let these authoritarians know that you won't put up with it. That's all I wanted to say about that. So we will take them to task as much as we possibly can, and I hope that it makes the statement. I think it will. So this isn't over yet. And I guess I'm gonna let it go now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let it go.
Let it go. Let it go.
No, stop.
Let it be. Let it be. Wisdom.
We have officially traveled to the silly place.
See, there you go.
I think
Thanks,
Rosa has to be the
Rachel.
gatekeeper.
No, silly place.
All right, let's
Ryan,
end it.
that kills people.
Somebody's echoing. Just
Yes.
end it. Ryan, just turn it off.
All right, I'm gonna
I'm
go.
ready.
Bye.
Bye.